Okay, let's just review real quick the animal phyla that we've covered so far before we go into the cephalopods. So remember that the phylum Porifera is our first phylum of animals. The important thing is that the Porifera includes the sponges. It's the only example organism that we've had in phylum Porifera. Just remember that's the sponges. The Porifera do not have true tissues. They are asymmetrical. They do not have symmetry. And then when we move on to the phylum Ctenophora, these have two tissue layers. They are diploblastic, two tissue layers, and they include the comb jellies. The cnidarians also have two tissue layers. They're diploblastic, but they do have stinging cells, unlike the Ctenophora. Both of the phylum Ctenophora and Cnidaria, both of these phyla have radial symmetry as adults. And we talked about some of the different types of cnidarians besides jellyfish include sea anemones, corals, hydra, Portuguese man-of-war, and then we moved on to the phylum Mollusca. The phylum Mollusca, mollusk means soft-bodied. The phylum Mollusca is our first example of a triploblastic animal. So they're protostomes, meaning that the mouth forms first. And the mollusks are divided into bivalves, gastropods, and cephalopods. So bivalve means two shell, gastropod means stomach-footed, and cephalopod means head-footed. And that's going to be the squids and the octopus, and another one that I really love is the cuttlefish. So they do have a beak that's used to tear prey apart, so the cephalopods are predators. They have well-developed sense organs. They have definitely a capacity for learning. You can Google octopus and cuttlefish videos on YouTube. It shows amazing capacity for learning. So here are two cephalopod pictures here. This is a chambered nautilus, which does have a shell, but most of them do not. The squid does not have a shell, and the octopus and the cuttlefish do not have shells. Now we're on the phylum Annelida. The phylum Annelida, or the annelids, we also call the segmented worms. So the segmented worms would include the earthworms, but even though the earthworms are terrestrial and fresh, their source of water, because they do have to have moisture, is fresh water. But most of the annelids are actually marine. We may not, they may not be common to us, but most of the annelids actually live in the ocean. So now we're going to see in the phylum Annelida, so again, they have three tissue layers. They are protostomes. They have a closed circulatory system. That means they have blood located within a heart connected by blood vessels. So the blood is enclosed. It doesn't get released into an open area. That would be the open circulatory system. They do have a nerve cord, but it's on the ventral side instead of the dorsal side, like in vertebrates. It's on their stomach side. So they have a ventral solid nerve cord, whereas if we were describing humans, for example, we have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. Most of the annelids are marine and have these bristles called setae that help them to move. The oligochaetes, like earthworms, have very few setae, but the polychaetes have many setae. And then we have a section on earthworms. I just want to mention a few things. One thing is their reproduction. Earthworms are hermaphrodites. Now, what a hermaphrodite means is a hermaphrodite, and I do want to make sure you understand there are no hermaphrodite humans, none. We have a lot of labels in our world today that we use, but hermaphrodite is not one of them because we don't have any humans that are true hermaphrodites. A true hermaphrodite has both male and female sex organs, is capable of releasing sperm into another earthworm, and also capable of receiving the sperm and producing offspring. So they're literally, any earthworm can mate with any earthworm. The sex does not matter because they're all hermaphrodites. So this enables any earthworm that comes across any other earthworm, under the ground in the soil, they can mate. What they do, they lie parallel to each other. They face in opposite directions, and they fuse their clitellum, which is a segment, is kind of a thickened area on the earthworm, closer to the head, that secretes mucus and protects the sperm from drying out. There's no larval stage in the earthworms. So here is an illustration of an earthworm, and this part is the clitellum. I'm sure you've seen an earthworm at some point and recognize this. So this is the part where they actually join together, and they have seminal vesicles which produce sperm, and then they have I'm trying to find the female part, I'm sorry. Well, they also have the area that contains the egg. And so they're able to, I just can't see it on here. I'm sorry, I don't want to waste time. But they do have both male and female parts. And you can see here too, another thing is you can see that they have 5 pairs of hearts or little pumps. And then the blood vessels run along the dorsal and ventral surface of the earthworm. Means their back and their stomach. All right, other annelids besides the earthworm. The earthworm is an oligochaete, but most annelids are polychaetes, and that means they have many setae that are found in bundles on structures called parapodia, and they're marine. They live in the ocean. Well, this is an exception to that. Leeches are usually freshwater, but leeches are polychaetes. You have clam worms that are marine. Leeches do not have setae, so just to show you the difference between them. This is a leech, and you can see it has these lines representing the different body segments, kind of like an earthworm, but a leech, of course, is a parasite. And then you have the parapodia that you would see on a marine clamworm, which is a polychaete. A leech and an earthworm would both be oligochaetes, whereas the clamworm and other marine annelids would be polychaetes. The leech and the earthworm would be oligochaetes. Okay, I took a break because I was a little bit concerned about them putting the leech after the slide was talking about the polychaetes. So it's important for you to understand that the oligochaetes are the earthworms. Oligochaetes have few setae, they're the earthworms. So I read a little bit deeper, and the leeches are related to the oligochaetes. The polychaetes are what you see all over this page. All of these images are images of marine polychaetes. Clamworms are one example, but there are a lot of other ones. I think there's ribbon worms. There's a lot of different ones, and you can see they have many setae. So let's go back to the notes. And we're going to move on to the phylum Platyhelminthes. The phylum Platyhelminthes is another group of protostomes, so we're still triploblastic, 3 tissue layers, and the first opening is the mouth. Platy means flat, helminthes means worm, so that's where you get the flatworms from. A tapeworm is probably the most well-known of the Platyhelminthes. The Platyhelminthes have only one opening, which means their mouth and their anus are the same thing. They take in food and get rid of solid waste through that same one opening. They do not have a coelom or a body cavity. A planaria is actually studied a lot in biology class, especially when we have lab that that meets face to face. They're fun to order the planaria and study them. One lab that you can do is you can take your planarian and you can cut it in half, and you can take several planaria and cut them in different ways and look the next day, and some of them have regenerated. You can learn how they're able to regenerate, and which ways you can cut them up and get them to regenerate versus which way will kill them. But there's other labs you can do with them. They have these really sensitive areas that are somewhat like ears. I think maybe they may sense vibrations or something. They're called auricles. So they're primitive ears, and you can touch them, and they're very sensitive. They don't like it when you touch them. So you can actually train your planaria to choose when they encounter, like if you put them in a maze, and they have a choice to go left or right, you can train them like to always choose right or always choose left. Or I did this in high school. It's one of these projects that I'll never forget. I spent weeks on it, but I trained mine to turn right the first time and left the second time. So it would always go right, then left, right, then left, So I was very proud of that. I still am. But anyway, planaria can be trained in that way. By you just touch them on the side you don't want them to go, and they will go the other way. So a planarian, as you can see, is a flat worm. If you cut through its body, it's solid all the way through. It doesn't have a body cavity or an open area where the organs are. The genus for these freshwater planarians is called Dugezia. They do have auricles that function as sense organs. Definitely they have the ability to sense touch. They have eye spots, not true eyes, but they have eye spots that are sensitive to light. They have a ladder type nervous system. They do have a primitive brain. And again, like the annelids, they are hermaphrodites. And that will be the way they reproduce sexually, but they can also reproduce by regeneration asexually. They have undergone cephalization. They have a head region. Now, some other flatworms are flukes, which are known as trematodes, tapeworms, which are known as cestodes. So our flatworm examples are going to be planaria, flukes, and tapeworms. And flukes are parasites. All flukes are parasites. And so are tapeworms. But the planaria are harmless. They are not parasitic. The head in the flukes and the tapeworms has been replaced by hooks or suckers, so they can attach to their host. Flukes are normally hermaphrodites. This shows you the life cycle of a blood fluke, schistoma, that has a part of its life cycle is spent in snails and part in humans. And then you have the tapeworm. Taenia solium is the pork tapeworm, and you get that by eating the cyst of the tapeworm along with your pork. So the primary host in the pork tapeworm is the human, and the secondary host is the pig. And the pig's muscle gets encysted with the tapeworm cyst, and then we eat it, and then it enters into our intestines and attaches. So, phylum Platyhelminthes, remember, has the tapeworms, planaria, and flukes. Rotifers are the phylum Rotifera. These are the ones that are microscopic. They're named for a crown of cilia that rotates in their head region. It's like a rotating wheel in their head region. And here's a picture of one. These are really cool to Google also, videos of them. But it does have a head region. And then we're going to move on in our next video and talk about the ecdysozoans. These are the ones that have a cuticle that they shed. And it's going to include the roundworms and the arthropods.